Welcome back to the Lights Out podcast, bedtime stories for boys and girls around the world. Good evening, boys and girls. Are you ready for bed? Are you all snuggled up and ready for another Lights Out bedtime story? Well, you're in for a treat tonight, because tonight's story is called Alto, the Little Rain Cloud by Martyn Kenneth. And this was a live improvised story I told way back in November in 2019 with a sleeping baby on my shoulder. You can check that out in the archives on the Lights Out podcast. A big shout out goes to all those who have visited the website martynkenneth.com and downloaded some of the free books. This Little Rain Cloud, Alto, I want to get finished so I can upload it and so you can download it. Anyway, back to the story, because it's all about the story. Alto, the Little Rain Cloud by Martyn Kenneth. Once upon a time, there was a little rain cloud called Alto, and it was a very kind little rain cloud, because its mummy, Nimbus, and daddy, Cumulo, had taught it that if it was ever going to rain, it should at least rain on some places that needed the water, like a farmer's field after it had been sowed, or hot swings in the playground, so that the young boys and girls didn't burn their legs when they got on. But that was just a memory for the little rain cloud, because now his mummy and daddy were not around, and he was all by himself, way up in the sky, floating around and feeling rather lonely. And now, when I say he was a little rain cloud, I mean he was about as big as your kitchen table, or a piano, or maybe the size of 2 TVs. Maybe the size of your sofa. You get the picture, right? So it was a little bit big, but not really small for a rain cloud, because they do get very big. And when it was way up high in the sky, you could barely see it, so nobody took much notice of him. The weather forecasters on the telly never picked him up. However, it was one of those clouds that on a hot, sunny day with a clear blue sky, if you would look up and see him, you would stand there, and it would make the blue of the sky stand out even more. You might say, "Look at that little cloud in the sky. Isn't it just wonderful?" And it made the blue sky look even more blue. The little rain cloud, Alto, he liked that. He liked to be noticed. It didn't happen very often. This little rain cloud was also a bit mischievous, or cheeky, or some might say even a bit naughty. I think it was partly because his mum and daddy were not around anymore, and so he did like to play around, and because nobody could really see him, he was able to get away with lots of things. Some of the things that he used to do, well, they weren't really bad, because, let's face it, how much damage could a little white cloud the size of your sofa actually do? Well, one thing he liked to do was to rain in the playgrounds and make just a little bit of a wet patch, even a wet circle, on the playground just before the children came out to play. And they would tumble into the yard laughing and then stop all of a sudden, scratch their heads, and then shout for the teacher and ask, "Has it been raining, sir? Why is it wet over there? What's happening?" He liked that. Sometimes he would like to rain on the car of the teachers, especially the ones that shouted at the children at break time or in the school. Alto was especially happy if it was a very hot summer's day and the teacher had left his car windows open, meaning he could rain all into the car and get it wet. And so, back to Alto, the little rain cloud, floating around, raining here and raining there, and feeling rather sad. You see, his brothers and sisters and his mummy and daddy had been blown away one day in a great big storm a long time ago, or Alto thought it was long, but he wasn't quite sure. The rain cloud, Alto, did want to find his mummy and daddy, and he kept searching and searching, but he could never find them. One day, or should I say one night, the little rain cloud was floating around, and a big grey thunderstorm cloud came along and barged him right out of the way. The little rain cloud was blown aside and settled down near the side of a mountain top and landed just behind the tip of this mountain as he watched this wide and deep, angry and grey storm cloud growing and growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, as he peeked past the tip of the mountain again, the little rain cloud saw sparks of lightning flying out of the cloud, and the bellowing thunder ringing all around. The thunder was deafening, and the rain cloud was scared. Scared, but very, very impressed. He watched the big storm, blowing gusts of wind, moving trees, bumping cars, and even swaying buildings. I'd like to be a storm cloud. I would like to be able to make lightning and thunder and blow a few cars around, thought Alto. But I'm just a little rain cloud. How could I possibly do that? And as the storm kept passing over, and as he watched all the damage unfold as the light came from the sun popping up from the horizon, the little rain cloud had second thoughts. Do these big storm clouds do anything else, apart from all this damage? Look at those broken trees, and look at that farmer. He's crying because of all his crops have been blown down. That's not very nice. But Alto kept watching, and Alto kept close. He then saw that the big storm cloud rained so much rain that it made a new river flowing through a little village down below. So then he knew at least there was lots of rain and water coming out of a storm cloud that big. As the storm cloud continued to chug by, the little rain cloud tagged along and followed behind, just far enough, mind, that nobody noticed him, but close enough that he could hear and feel everything. The storm rumbled and grumbled and growled and kept marching along, rolling over the ocean, picking up the waves, tossing the boats and the ships here and there like little rubber ducks in a bathtub. Alto saw how a little boy and a white-haired captain struggled to steer the mysterious ship towards a whale in calmer waters. And as time went on, the little rain cloud grew more and more impressed. He knew he shouldn't, but it was hard not to admire something so powerful and impressive. And it wasn't long before Alto wanted to become a storm cloud himself again. Funnily enough, his wish came true when he got a little bit too close to the storm cloud on a very wet and windy day. Alto was tagging a bit too close behind his hero, and as the behemoth slowed down to enjoy the sights of boats in the harbour crashing around like rice grains being poured into a sink bowl, whoosh! Alto was sucked up into the tail of the storm, and he couldn't get out. He was like a little fly stuck on a grand spider's web, or, you know, when you get your clothes caught on a bit of a wild bush. He thought, now I am part of a storm cloud. What am I going to do? And he huffed and he puffed, and with all his might he pulled himself and blew himself and pushed himself off the tail of the giant storm cloud. And as he looked down, he was now much bigger than before, about the size of a kitchen, not a kitchen table, about the size of a living room, but not a sofa. Wow! he thought, I might try this again. And so he did. He floated back over to the storm cloud and touched its tail again. Straight away he got sucked right in. But as soon as he did, he huffed and he puffed and he pushed and he pulled and he snapped away from the tail of the storm again. And yes, he looked down and was much bigger than before. Now he was about the size of a house. And wow, did he feel much stronger. He could feel the power, and he could feel the water starting to build up, which brought with it its own kind of energy. He didn't wait too long. He tried it again, and again, and again and again. And after a while, after being pushed and pulled and joining and snapping off again, and growing bigger and bigger, this little rain cloud, Alto, looked around, and there was no storm cloud. There was just a little rain cloud looking back at him. And then he looked at himself, and he realized now he was the storm cloud, great and grand, looking at what was left of the storm cloud before, a little white cloud. He blew the little cloud away and thought to himself, now what games can we play now? And he rumbled and he grumbled and he growled along. And he came to the shore with a little harbour with a few boats. He let the lightning bolts fly from his belly, from his nose, and he rocked some boats and did a little bit of damage as he passed over. As he passed over the town, he didn't look back, and he went to the next town, and to the next town, and to the next little village, and he passed over them all, growling and grumbling and rumbling along, lightning and thundering, until there was nothing left of this little island. And he sat there as the sun was shining on his back, and he was blocking out the shade on the island, listening to the people crying, listening to the farmers wailing, and the farmers' wives roaring with anger. And he suddenly realized that he had made a very bad decision. He had made a terrible mistake, and he'd used his power for the wrong thing. In that moment, in a second, in a heartbeat, in the blink of an eye, Alto, the big, dark storm cloud, turned white, and he stood up straight and turned into a cumulonimbus cloud like his daddy. In that moment, Alto realized many things, but the one thing he remembered was that sometimes clouds cannot fix the things that they've done, but they can always start from that moment to make things better, to help other places and other people. And so that's what the little rain cloud did. He floated along, village by village, town by town, city by city, country by country, continent by continent, and he rained all over the places that needed the water, like farmers' fields, dry lakes and rivers, and reservoirs. He rained on hot slides and swings to cool the little boys' and girls' arms and legs down, and he also did keep a bit of his cheeky streak, and rained on the little bad boys and little bad girls, or the teachers, just a little bit. But he was very famous in all the forecasts and all the weather news, because they would see him on the telly, and he would make shapes. So when the forecaster was saying that Alto was going to come to you and your town, the people knew exactly who he was. And you know, the good ending to this story is that eventually, after being on telly, somehow he was able to find his mommy and daddy and his brother and sister, and they all lived happily ever after in the sky, floating around, happy as could be, raining on people and places that needed it. And Alto would often tell the story of how he got sucked in to a powerful storm cloud, came out the other side as the storm cloud, and then made some bad decisions about misusing his power before he realized what he'd done and turned white as a sheet or white as a cloud and stood up straight with his shoulders back. And everything was fine after that. And that's the end of Alto, the Little Rain Cloud. I hope you liked it. Here on the Lights Out podcast, bedtime stories for boys and girls around the world. And that story was by me, Martyn Kenneth. Good night.